pools and eddies, trout are rising over the mayfly, and the sun is shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fish till the day that I die. Spring has thawed out the long bitter winter. The water is clear and the skies are blue. I'm standing in the middle of the Beaver Kill River. Might even capture and release one or two. Well, some folks like horses, cats or dogs. Me, I like fishing with a rod and a fly. Yes, fishing is a favorite pastime of mine. If I couldn't do it, I think I would cry. Well, life is good when I'm wading a river. It gets even better when I cast a fly. If I catch a trout, it don't really matter. It's fun just to be here and give it a try. Trout is rising in the far eddy. I make a false cast, then take my aim. If he takes the fly, I feel so much better. And if he doesn't, I'll feel no shame. Stoneflies and caddis and the riffles are plenty. Mayflies courting on fragrant breeze. And cedar wax wings come down from the heaven, wait for their dinner up in the pine trees. The water is cold and my waders leak, and it's raining now on my favorite stream. I'll bear it all, just fish with a feather, so when I sleep I will have a sweet dream. And life is good when I'm wading a river. It gets even better when I cast a fly. If I catch a trout, it don't really matter. It's fun just to be here and give it a try. Oh, ripples and waves, pools and eddies, trout are rising for the mayfly, and the sun is shining down on the valley. Hope to be a fly fishing till the day that I die. Yes, I hope to be a fly fishing till the day that I die. Hey folks, Curtis Mayfly here again for Riffles and Waves. This is show number 4 of 2011. I hope that's what it is. And today's show we're going to have pretty much a full clip of waste handling on how they handle the waste from hydrofracking projects out west and coming to a town near you, possibly in the near future. So this is stuff that you need to know before this process takes over. They like to keep us in the dark. They'll only tell us as much as we need to know, and they will also won't tell us everything. They're going to paint a beautiful picture like there's a green box sitting in a field and it's just pumping natural gas to everybody's house and stove, and it's so wonderful. That's not reality, folks. That's not the way it really is. There's a lot of chemicals involved. A lot of noxious chemicals are in the gas. It's not just pure and clean. So you need to know the facts. So learn it.
Waste fluids and sludge are handled in a number of ways. The following pictures are shown only to demonstrate that huge volumes of water must be dealt with in the production of natural gas. And in the West, we can count on evaporation. In the more humid areas of the country, that will not work. This is the evaporation pit for the wash water from the refinery I just showed you. Note the cannon-like apparatus shooting the water into the air to assist evaporation. And note how the berm around this pond is beginning to erode. Pits like this service large numbers of wells, usually for one operator. Look closely and you should be able to see the red cab on the water truck unloading. A unit like this is another source for the release of nitrogen oxides, diesel, and VOCs. We could see no netting over these pits. This facility accepted truckloads of fluids from small developers and wildcatters from a radius of about 50 miles or more. No sampling or accounting for the chemicals in the incoming fluids took place at this unit or any other disposable units that we've looked into. When the pits dry out and become sludge, the residue is then land farmed. It is disked into the soil and supposed to be biodegradable. However, the biocides used during drilling and fracking would undoubtedly make the land incapable of producing much vegetation and certainly allow no biodegradation. Quite a few of the products on our Colorado list contain silica, which when it dries will readily blow about as dust. Silica dust can cause silicosis, a serious lung disorder that can lead to a rapid and lethal form of lung cancer. And also, fine dust particles increase the smog or haze effect of ozone. In 2003, the highly respected nationwide oil and gas watchdog organization, OGAP, asked us about the health effects of the chemicals used in gas operations and started sending us lots of material safety data sheets, the MSDS sheets, that are attached to products that contain hazardous chemicals. That was when one of our staff and a pre-doctoral student from MIT on a National Science Foundation grant working with us for the summer set up a database in order to look at the long list of chemicals that we had at hand. As they began to look closely at the health effects, a consistent pattern or profile of the health categories kept popping up based on 14 traditional toxicological categories used in government publications. The last time this program was updated for Colorado alone, there were 246 products and 278 chemicals on our list. 93% of the 246 products had identifiable health effects. The other 7% represent the products for which we had limited information because the ingredients were listed as either proprietary or the names were too general or no ingredients were listed. And 5 of the products on this list had no ingredient information at all. Of those products that had health effects, 14% had 1 to 3 effects and 86% had 4 to 14 effects. And what surprised us was to find that 43% of the products on our list contain endocrine disruptors, chemicals that can interfere with the development of individuals before they are born and cause irreversible lifetime changes in their health and how they function later in life. Wildlife, starting at the lowest level in the food web, has proven to be sensitive to chemicals of this nature at ambient, or what we call environmental concentrations. We then looked at the chemicals based on their major pathway exposure. Were they soluble? Could they evaporate? And we were able to identify 63% of the 278 chemicals on our list using what are called CAS numbers, the American Chemical Society's Chemical Abstract System. The CAS number made it possible to specifically search the literature for the health effects of these chemicals. And we created the following bar graphs based on the results of literature searches. Looking at the water-soluble chemicals alone, this is the health profile they produced. The bars tell you how often a certain health category is associated with all of the chemicals on the list. In other words, if you look at the screen, you will see that approximately 95% of the chemicals on the list could irritate the eyes, the skin, and cause sensitization, in other words, trigger allergies. And remember, a chemical can have up to 14 health effects. And it turned out that those health categories or vital systems most associated with the chemicals, starting from left to right, are the skin, eye, and sensory organs that I just mentioned, respiratory tract, stomach, liver, the brain, and the nervous system. The adverse health effects expressed by those systems, in many cases, would occur shortly after exposure. These are conditions that may not often be brought to the attention of clinicians because they seem minor. Itching, burning skin, burning eyes, sore throats, nausea, headaches, sinusitis, flu-like symptoms, sensitization, fatigue, dizziness, mild tingling in the extremities that can lead to permanent nerve damage that is irreversible. Or if severe, the person would be brought to the emergency room first for treatment for direct exposure to burns on the skin, for example. The other health categories, continuing on from left to right, include ecological effects, cardiovascular in the heart, the immune system, other, that includes bone damage and death, the reproductive system, development, mutagenicity, cancer, and endocrine disorders. All health problems that would not be expressed immediately, but could turn up as chronic health problems months or years later. And they could never be traced directly to industrial exposure. And here you see the profile associated with the identifiable volatile compounds that is almost the same, but with greater frequency and more chemicals are linked with the chronic long-term disorders. It is important to point out here where cancer lies on the graph. This analysis reveals that 38% of the chemicals can cause cancer, compared to 78% of the chemicals that can cause brain and nervous system damage. Maybe we should be more interested in these other health effects to the left when determining the health risks caused by the chemicals used in this industry. This is a picture of one of the corporate 400-bed man camps to house the gas field workers to make sure they have enough people to work around the clock. Men are being flown into Colorado from Canada to work for 4 weeks, 12 hours on and 12 hours off around the clock, and never leave the gas patch until they fly back to Canada for 2 weeks off and then back to Colorado again. Local laborers generally work 12-hour shifts as well, and men coming off their ships are exhausted. They complain of severe headaches and have other complaints matching some of what I mentioned earlier. Now, for a long time, we believed what the developers were telling us, that drilling muds are benign, that they are safe, until we got an urgent request to see if we had any information about 40 products used in Wyoming during drilling. There had been a serious blowout during a routine drilling operation in Wyoming, and this was a new well where the drillers got to a depth of 8,000 feet and something went wrong with the casing near the surface. And at an extremely high pressure, the well began to blow out. There were 2 major cracks at the surface from which the muds and gases flew up into the air, and ooze came out of the road cuts and ran down the county road. It took 57 hours to get under control. Now, this was adjacent to a housing development, and it was not surprising to hear that the people living in the area had to be evacuated using respirators and stay away from their homes for days because of the noxious fumes. This graph shows what we were able to learn about the chemicals spilled when a fracking mixing chemical truck was involved in an accident in Garfield County, Colorado, on one of those narrow 2-lane county roads. The truck heading to a fracking operation spilled 318 gallons of material that contained 4 products. According to the MSDS sheets, there were 15 different chemicals involved. Here you can see how they fell out by health category. The column on the farthest left in this case covers ecological effects. They all would have had an effect on the environment in some way or another, like the fish, invertebrates, and plants. And here you see the profile for the volatiles, and here you see the profiles for the water-soluble chemicals. All four were associated with all the health categories we show here. We were sent the test results from 6 New Mexico evaporation pits that are scheduled to be shut down in the near future. The health effects of the 51 chemicals and metals that were detected produced a health pattern even more hazardous than the patterns of the chemicals found in our spreadsheets for the state of New Mexico. In addition, some of the chemicals were found at extremely high concentrations, well above New Mexico and federal safety levels. But only 8 chemicals detected in the pits matched the chemicals used in New Mexico. Upon looking at the chemical testing protocols used in the New Mexico pit study, we found that except for naphthalene, they did not test for the other chemicals that we have on our list that are being used in New Mexico. And we found that over 90% of the chemicals reported in the pits are on the CERCLA, or the Superfund list of toxic chemicals. The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act of 2005, and the EPCRA, Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, and the EPCRA List of Lists of 2006, which raises questions about how they got into the pits. Now keep in mind that of all the products on our list for all states, we know nothing about the composition for almost 40% of them, and only know the full composition for a little more than 10% of them. Now let's get away from the pits and go back up into the mountains for a minute. It is a rare day in the West anymore when we can take a picture without a blue haze destroying the vistas. Here you see the high country where gas development is encroaching on our beautiful forests and mountain meadows and in a major western watershed. Recently, scientists at NOAA reported wintertime ozone in the Wyoming, Jonah, Pinedale, anticline gas fields rising to more than 140 parts per billion. 2 years ago, Pinedale and the Jackson Hole area hit 155 parts per billion. At that time, they had to shut down the ski areas and actually close the schools and not let children go outside in that area. That was twice, more than twice, the compliance level that EPA has established for ozone, which is 75 parts per billion. And even at 75 parts per billion, EPA scientists admit that any increment in parts per billion above 40 parts per billion, you can begin to see measurable health effects among our children, among the newborn, and among the aged. Our Rocky Mountain forests lie right in the path of the air pollutants from gas and oil development to the west and could easily be caught in an ozone plume. Ozone plumes can extend over 200 miles. Like the alveoli in our lungs, the stomata in leaves on deciduous trees and needles on conifers suffer ozone burn. This leads to reduced growth rates, increased susceptibility to disease, and early death, have all been blamed on ozone in evergreen forests, commercial tree species to fruit trees, food and forage crops, hay and alfalfa, starting at 50 parts per billion. These recent readings were more than double that. The trees in our mountain forests in the west are the keepers of our water. They make it possible for us to have water year-round. Not only does ozone pose a direct threat to human health, it also poses a covert threat to our already marginal freshwater supply in the west by weakening the trees. But we know now that wherever natural gas operations are going to commence or increase, air pollution must be treated as seriously as water pollution. Downwind effects on agriculture and those living in rural areas must now be taken into consideration. We need to know a lot more. Products must be labeled with a complete formulation along with the quantity or concentration of every chemical used in the product. And most important, identification of the fluids that are used to fill the product containers to the brim. The source and quality of all water used to fracture must be accounted for, as well as the formulation or how much of each product is used in the fracking fluids. Dangerous chemicals are being mixed in large quantities in the gas fields by people who have no idea what they are using. Even the bosses have no idea what is being used. Yet they will stand by the company's mantra that the chemicals are safe. The amount of fluids injected and recovered during fracking should be public information. Data should be made public about the chemical composition of what is in pits, on the well pads, and also in the offside waste disposal areas. From a life support system perspective in the West, we better find out how much of the water being taken from the Colorado River drainage basin to produce natural gas is being returned to the Colorado River system. Will this affect the Colorado River Compact commitments to the states downstream? This applies to all river drainages across the country, even in areas of high precipitation as in the east. As the size and intensity of natural gas extraction increased over the past decade, so have the numbers and the amounts of chemicals increased, putting air and water resources and more people at risk. And from a public health perspective, the time has come for full disclosure. Realistic, comprehensive water monitoring programs must be set up that include numerous downslope sites miles away at outcroppings, watering holes, springs, creeks, and domestic wells where chemicals injected underground might eventually surface. Although it is too late already in some areas, baseline monitoring of water quality and ozone should commence immediately in all other areas where activity is going to start. No matter where the activity is taking place geographically, someone should be charged with quantifying both agricultural and drinking water depletion, and especially in light of climate change. Now, our information reveals not only immediate but chronic and latent hazards are posed to human and wildlife health from chemical contaminants being introduced in our watersheds, but also an emerging threat to our air that will not go away until the gas fields shut down and the stationary and mobile sources associated with processing and delivering gas are no longer in operation. This generally is not discussed when the impacts of gas production are under consideration. We must think in terms of prevention. Thank you for listening. Without the support of these organizations and people, we would not have been able to bring you this presentation. And for the list of chemicals being used, go to TEDx's website, www.endocrindisruption.org, and look at our natural gas program. We will be updating it regularly, and you can learn more about fracking fluids there. And most important, while you are at our site, go to the endocrine disruption program and look at the fossil fuel connection. It will give you more reason to seek other, more sustainable sources of energy than fossil fuels.
the sound of music.